Now we're going to get into the last pick of the dodgeball team when it comes to modes, which is Locrian. Now Locrian's interesting. It's the kind of mode that is extremely unpopular compared to the other 6. And I feel like it is a little bit of an underdog, but at the same time, I do get why almost nobody likes to use it. Basically, there's lots of tension in that mode that it just always seems to want to stay tense. It's like even resolving on it just kind of feels weird. And kind of an explaining factor of that is just the fact that if you were to like go through the major scale in terms of its chords, right? With each note having its chord. This is the 7th note in the scale, right? So it's the mode based on the 7th note in the major scale, which if you use it as a chord, it would be a diminished chord. Now, a diminished chord by its very nature does not resolve. It just always is a tense sounding chord. So that kind of makes sense why the Locrian mode would, reflect that. So let's break it down. It's actually very similar to the Phrygian mode. So if we were to take the Phrygian mode, going back to that as our example, right, we have the key of E, right, we have our root note, stays the same this whole time, 7th fret on the A string, then we have our minor second, our flattened second, so we have 7, 8, and then we have 10 on the A string, and then our 4th is the same, right, 7th fret on D, and our 5th is going to be different. Our 5th is now 8th fret. Ooh, very, very tense. And then our 6th is going to be here, the 10th fret on the D string, and then our 7th, which is on the 7th fret of the G string, and then our octave. So those are the notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the frets are 7th, 8th, 10th, 7th, 8th, 10th, 7th, 9th. Now what's interesting is that these have a very unique sort of stacking of certain notes. If we were to wander through it by going through notes that are kind of on top of each other, you get this really interesting sound. Like, sounds very like, kind of like something you'd hear in prog rock, So it's very unique, and again, very tense. There's going to be lots of points of tension. So you can kind of get that Phrygian vibe, right, with that flat second there, that minor second. But it's really that flat 5 that adds a very interesting thing, and I do kind of like to do the little trills, like. It's another fun thing to do, to kind of like finesse your way through these notes in a way that kind of keeps it interesting. So you're kind of exploiting that tension in a way that conveys kind of a musical idea. So it's like, no matter where you go, it just feels tense and unresolved. I'm really like lingering on that for both of us here. So for you to really hear it and listen to what I'm doing as I'm just stumbling through these notes, it's still driving that point home that there's just so much tension in this mode. And so another reason why it's something that's a little less popular. Like you wouldn't hear the likes of Eric Clapton playing a mode like this, I don't think, right? Not that I've heard. You hear a lot of jazzers play it, and because, it's something that you do hear a lot of diminished chords in jazz, and so there are plenty of ways to utilize the Locrian mode. I'm not gonna pretend to be a jazz expert. I'm certainly not. I revere the style. I think it's wonderful, and I think the players are incredible and on a completely different league. But I just, personally, when it comes to the Locrian mode, it's something I literally never use in my personal gig. But as you get familiar with all these different points of tension in the mode, you can find ways to make it work, you know, because again, it's still close to Phrygian, and if you like the Phrygian mode, you can make the Locrian mode work if you wanted to, but that flat fifth is pretty weird. That sounds kind of cool. Like if I were to just play those kind of notes through, like, you know, like that way, it's almost like, sounds kind of soundtracky, like in a part in a, like there's a tense moment in some kind of movie, or maybe like before like a sword fight is about to break out, you know? You know, it's like, so you can find actual like, you know, musical context to what you're playing, and that's all part of it, right? So like what I'm doing here is what I want you to do is to find interesting ways to navigate this scale and then really get to know it so that you can give it a fair shot at whether or not it's something that you can actually apply to your own arsenal of scales. Another thing that I like to do to actually make a very tense mode like this interesting is to apply little bends, you know. It gives it more of an Eastern sound, you know. So like, you know, when it's these two notes here, like between the 7th and 8th frets on the A and the D string, it just kind of makes it sound more like I kind of know what I'm doing. I know what sound I'm going for. It's a very identifiable kind of sound. It sounds very Eastern, you know. It's got a really, it's almost like you're emulating the sound of like a traditional instrument outside of of the guitar, right? Like something completely different. In fact, one thing I like to do is I like to pick close to the bridge, so it actually kind of resembles like there's a Japanese, a traditional Japanese instrument called the koto, which is really cool. It's a beautiful instrument, very cool looking. It's like massive, and it's just a bunch of strings at different lengths. And then they essentially pluck it like a harp, kind of, and it's got this very twangy sound. So like when you pick close to the bridge, compared to like right here, it kind of emulates that sound a little bit. So like, so it adds like some really cool atmosphere, and it's something that, like, you know, again, it's very niche. It's not something you could just bust out at any time that would be relevant, you know, like over any kind of song. But even just sitting by yourself playing that, you know, it's cool. So like that's what I personally like to do if I'm encountering a scale that I don't typically use. I try to find ways to make it interesting so that in the moment when I am enjoying it, I'm able to actually like come up with ways to make it like at least justifiable for me to continue playing it, because who knows? I mean, you never know when inspiration might strike, and sometimes all it takes is little things like doing interesting bends or picking close to the bridge, whatever little things you can do that aren't drastic changes, right? But those little things can very much inspire brand new musical ideas. So to wrap up this modes mini-series, we just wanted to explore each of the 7 modes of the major scale, get to know them one by one, how each individual note sounds in relation to the root note, really get intimate with the mood of each of those scales, and then decide for ourselves, do we actually find it relevant to use it in our playing? So if you've gone through this part, you know, of this series, and you're like, hey, you know, I really like Ionian, Aeolian, and Mixolydian, right? Let's just say, hypothetically, that's totally fine. If that's relevant to what you see yourself playing and using, and what you can see most of your musical ideas like manifesting as, that is perfectly okay. Once you learn how to, you know, once you learn about the Locrian mode like we just did, you know, in this video, you don't necessarily have to be married to it and you have to utilize it now. But you've actually explored it, you've gotten to know it, and you're like, you know what, it's not really for me. And that's totally okay. So just keep that in mind as you're going through these. This is your little crash course on getting to know them and then finding out how to properly apply them to your own playing. Because at the end of the day, this is about you discovering, more of yourself as a player and being able to honestly express yourself. And expressing yourself involves conveying emotions. And those emotions can be conveyed by the different moods that these modes represent. So that's exactly why they're so important, and they're definitely worth looking into to see if it's actually something that you identify with and you can express yourself musically with.